Today we're in historic Charleston, South Carolina, and behind me is the harbor. You may notice this fort over here, Fort Sumter. And if you were watching the last video, you'll probably guess that's where I was going to go. Well, I'm at Fort Moultaire. This fort went through about 200 years of history. It was built during the Revolutionary War the first time, and the Park Service here has kept various through the years. It was actually put out of commission as far as a fort in 1947. So I'm standing right here on an observation tower from the World War II, and a big searchlight here behind me, be able to sweep across the harbor, and C-47. Anyway, from this fort during World War II, they controlled the submarine net that went across the harbor. They did have a U-boat lay mines out here, a couple of them lay mines out here in the channel. One of them was sunk out a ways, and they did have the harbor also mined. So we're going to go backwards through history. So we start in 1940s, World War II, and this would have been the view. I'm sure those trees weren't there to be able to look for ships, so on, out in the ocean, or trying to enter the harbor. So let's wander about, shall we? So now we're going to tour the harbor control command post. Should have been the duty officer's station, operations room. You can see the map over here on the wall with where the different forts are. These rapid fire guns down here in these 3 batteries were put in place around the time of the Spanish-American War, and they were here until World War II began. And they basically fired things that looked like big rifle bullets. Here's our 4.5-inch Armstrong gun. So down below was the magazine for it, and they had barred doors to let the air flow through, keep everything dry, keep unauthorized personnel out, but there are also blast doors that could be swung shut. So after the Civil War, the fort did fall into a little bit of disrepair, but then tensions around the world were increasing, and they installed these 15-inch Rodman smoothbore guns. And I'll take a look at one of their shells. They could fire up to about 4.5 miles. The cannonball weighed 434 pounds, and a crack crew of 15 could load and fire these every 4 minutes. They were here 1873 to 1898, Spanish-American War, and they were basically never used. So let's take a look at the. So that's what these Rodman guns fired. It's pretty big. Get an idea, bigger than my foot. So on to December 26th, 1860, Major Robert Anderson moved his command, or transferred it from here at Fort Moultaire to Fort Sumter. And during the move, he had his men spike the guns, so basically driving a metal spike down into the hole, to touch a hole to fire them off, and so they burned the gun carriages so that they couldn't be used to impede his movement across. The Confederates moved in immediately. They held this fort until February 17th of 1865. Basically, even through the siege of Charleston, this was not taken. It was bombarded quite a bit. So the guns here, this one is a 8-inch with a rifle barrel, and the one over here was a 10-inch. So they had this would have been this was the powder magazine. So these would have been. So as we exit the magazine, there's a thick brick wall here. The structure beyond that is solid brick. This was to help protect the magazine. You get an idea how thick this was from enemy shell fire coming in. This would have protected the entrance to the magazine, and basically the magazine was there to keep the powder dry. They periodically would bring it out, roll it around to keep it from caking, and yeah. Right here, this is the foundation for the enlisted men's barracks. The Confederates, when they had the fort, they tore it down because danger of it becoming flying debris and injuring more people. Officers, a little bit better place on the other side of the parade field. So how would you go about moving these big, heavy cannons around the post? Back didn't have engines and stuff. You would use things like this. So hoist the rope around here up through the block and tackle, lift it up, put it on a sledge and drag it around, either horse or men. Sometimes you would have wheels on these and pull it up into it so the cannon was underslung to make a carriage to move it around, and then pick it up and put it in place. So around the parade field there was there was like storage cellars around. This particular one appears to have taken a direct hit by Union artillery during the Civil War. Okay, so the masonry you see, that was from that upgrade in 1809. What they learned from the Civil War and the batteries of they had rifled artillery shells that could penetrate the masonry and then explode. The Confederates figured out that if you mounted earth around them, then those rifled shells would penetrate the earth and explode without actually reaching the structure. So that's why around here a lot of the batteries are protected by earthen mounds. The magazines are buried with just the entrance, and the entrance is facing away from the harbor, unlike the 1809 version. It actually, the entrance faced the harbor and had to have this huge protective structure. So, all right. Okay, so the fort of the 19th and 20th century is behind me. Going back farther in time into 1776, South Carolina was preparing for British invasion. So on this site, they built a fort using palmetto logs, and basically they built walls 10 feet high, double walled, 16 feet apart, filled them with sand. As you can see in this, it was only 500 square feet. The thing about the palmetto logs, which was great, is they're fibrous. So instead of blowing up in the splinters, they sort of absorbed the shock. On June 28th, 1776, the British fleet of 9 warships pulled up about 400 yards offshore, and they started firing broadsides at this fort for about 9 hours. They had like 300 heavy guns, but as I said, those palmetto logs would have just absorb the shock of that. 300 Patriots here under Colonel Moultaire only had 31 cannon, but they concentrated on the largest ships and created severe damage on those ships. And the British, it got near dark, they weighed anchor and drifted out on the ebb tide, got out of range. 4 years later, on May 12th, they came back. As you remember from, this is 1780. Some of my previous videos I talked about the British coming back to the south. They had a lot of respect for this fort, so they stayed at least 800 yards out of gun range, and went over near Fort Johnson on the other side of the harbor entrance, and they were able to lay siege to Charleston and eventually capture it. Basically staying away, a lot of respect for this little fort that was here. So these are reproductions of those cannon that were used in that palmetto fort. These were cast 1976 for the bicentennial, and so these represent the 3 English 18-pound cannon that they had in here. As I said, they had 31 guns. So there's some examples of the cannon used during the Civil War. Some of them, like the one at the very end, they're very rare. The one at the very end is the only known one in existence of that type. So we're inside the shell room, one of the shell rooms of Battery Jasper. These shells would have been brought out through these doors, loaded on this machine that would have lifted them up on these carriages to the guns that were placed above. Okay, so we're inside the observation area of battery Jasper. There were, let's see if I can get this up here. There were mounted here 10 what they called disappearing guns. And a ranging officer would be up here or up on top and taking manual ranges of the target and relating that to the guns to aim. Now the we showed below in the magazine where they would come up that hoist, come out here and roll onto a shell cart, and then rolled over to where the gun was placed. Now this would have been this was like from the Spanish-American War till the beginning of World War II. These were what they called disappearing guns, in that they would be cranked up. This shaft here would have a counterweight that would help bring that gun up. When it fired, it would come back down to be reloaded. You're behind these thick concrete walls. The gun crew is more protected other than something coming arcing up above. But these guns weighed 55 tons. They would throw a shell that weighed 571 pounds about 8.5 miles. High technology of the times, but as World War II came around, better shells or better artillery came about. So, well, there you have it. From the Revolutionary War, palmetto and sand fort to battery Jasper and Fort Moultaire itself, going, like I said, from the Revolutionary War right up into World War II. So almost 200 years of military history and how technology changed the art of warfare. And actually World War II taught us that coastal defenses really weren't as effective, with modern battleships being able to stay offshore and lob shells many miles. But there we have it. Fort Sumter in the distance. Say goodbye, YouTube, and we'll see where tomorrow takes me. You never know. Bye, YouTube. Man, these things are big.